Hello everybody and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World, where we bring you the best of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Don Arleth. We are already on the verge of a recession. That's the words of Russia's Minister of Economic Development at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. For some time now, the Russian economy has been showing signs of cracks, in stark contrast to the high growth Russia experienced in 2023 and 2024 of 3.6% and 3.8% respectively. This year, economic growth has dried up and is estimated to come in at just 1.4%, with the trend pointing further downwards. Now let's unpack what was said at Russia's premier and largest economic forum in St. Petersburg with Jan Kennedy's report.
Russia's flagship economic forum in St. Petersburg is widely viewed as a platform for the Kremlin to show off its investment potential and boost confidence in the country's economy. But this year, Russia's economy minister made an unexpectedly blunt comment, leaving the panel host and global spectators stunned.
According to the current business environment and indicators, I think we are already on the verge of sliding into recession.
As economy minister, you should say something optimistic. Otherwise, it will appear on the internet immediately that Reshetnikov predicted that we would fall into recession.
I didn't predict it, I said that we are on the verge. Then everything depends on our decisions.
His remarks seemed aimed at Elvira Nabiullina, the head of Russia's central bank, who was also on the panel. Earlier this month, the central bank cut interest rates by 1 percentage point, though they remain at an eye-watering 20%. Still, after the cut, Nabiullina urged caution due to inflation concerns.
There might be pauses between steps. Moreover, if inflation stops decreasing sustainably or even starts accelerating, the key rate may be raised. We need to maintain tight monetary conditions to ensure further disinflation.
While Russian inflation has eased slightly, as shown in official reports, which, according to many, should be taken with a pinch of salt, it stubbornly remains at more than double the central bank's target.
In Russia, it's still around 10%. So living standards in Russia has been declining because of high inflation.
But this caution has resulted in Russia's economy growing by a mere 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025. 3 times lower than last year. And the IMF expects the Russian economy to grow by 1.4% this year. Next year, it is forecast to slow even further. And experts believe Russia has reached the limit of its growth potential.
The only reason Russia is able to grow is because of this massive Keynesian explosion of capital into the defense sector, which then drove the economy for the last 2 years. Now that has expired itself, and now we're seeing the limits of the Russian economy and financial system to drive growth.
Meanwhile, revenues from energy exports, accounting for a third of the Kremlin's budget, dropped by more than a third year-on-year in May due to lower oil prices and energy sanctions.
Gazprom cannot substitute their partners in European Union countries with partners in China. To some extent, it's possible, but you cannot do it without some limitations. And Russia already has reached these limits.
And tougher times are on the horizon, with the European Union moving to cut Russian gas out of its energy supply completely, even if peace can be achieved. Jan Kennedy for TVP World.
And now joining us to dig into all the economic indicators showing us where Russia's economy is headed is economist and professor Anders Åslund, senior fellow at Peterson Institute for International Economics.
Thank you.
Hello, great to see you. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Yes, now we see St. Petersburg Economic Forum. We saw Elvira Nabiullina as well as the Minister for Development, Economic Development there in Russia. Looking like they're pointing fingers at each other for the downturn in economic growth in Russia. Is Russia already in a recession?
No, but this is quite expected that Russia will come into a crunch in the second half of this year with hardly any growth, as Minister Reshetnikov suggested. And the main problem is the Western sanctions. The financial sanctions means that Russia this year will run out of all its liquid reserves. At the beginning of this year, it had $38 billion of liquid reserves in the National Welfare Fund, and that is exactly what Russia needs for a 2% of GDP budget deficit. So Russia is bound to cut public expenditure by 1/10 at the end of this year. And on top of that, if the oil prices stay low, that could take another 1% of GDP. That is cut federal expenditure from 20% of GDP to 17% of GDP. It's not a catastrophe, but that's severe austerity, and that will mean less growth or a certain decline.
Do you think the 1.4% projection is optimistic?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that we can come to stagnation. And Elvira Nabiolina herself has talked about stagflation since October last year. And Russia has maintained a very high interest rate of 21% from October until a few days ago. Now it's down to 20%. The official inflation is 10%, more widely considered probably 12 to 13%, because that's what inflationary expectations are. So Russia is in a certain fiscal crunch. It's not a catastrophe, but it means that Russia needs to cut public expenditure. And what can they cut? Defense and security is 41% of federal expenditures this year. That's 8% of GDP. So Russia needs to tighten the budget. They have a plan to cut the military expenditures, and now they might be forced to do so.
Now, there are some people, especially the hawks in Moscow, are saying that Vladimir Putin could hold on and actually continue to run this war indefinitely. But with all of the indicators that you just highlighted, if we have stagflation, we have liquidity running out, with their reserves dwindling at 21 billion. If you add up their gold reserves, that just adds another 8 billion, so less than $30 billion. Can Russia realistically continue to spend the amount of money that they're spending in defense, or is there another item line in the budget that's just going to have to go?
Well, they have tightened all social expenditure enormously. What they are cutting now is these very big bonus payments for people who voluntarily join the military. And that's the first thing to go. But as it looks to me, Russia would have to cut on military expenditure itself. And the big problem we have not mentioned as yet is a shortage of labor. Russia has an unemployment just over 2% of the labor force, which really means that it's over full employment, just as in Soviet times. And a major reason for this is the mobilization that Putin undertook in September 2022, when net 1 million youngish men, well-educated men, left Russia for good. So Putin cannot mobilize troops. He has to buy them, and now he doesn't have money to buy contract soldiers.
Right. Now, another thing that the hawks in Moscow were saying, I read an article recently of some unnamed officials that were saying that actually Vladimir Putin needs to declare war because he can save money on paying these soldiers these high salaries that you just mentioned. And this is a way for him to boost the military by maybe an additional million, maybe 2 million men. Is this a potential move that Vladimir Putin could make?
No, or at least he doesn't seem to think that he can do it, because he has avoided that now for 3 years to call for another mobilization. And therefore he's really in a tough place. Putin's preference is to buy soldiers, and then he can get soldiers from far away parts of Russia, where people are happy to get the money, while Moscow and St. Petersburg and the other big cities in Russia, they don't want to go to war. Very few people there participate in the war. So this is very much a war fought by the poor people in the outskirts of Russia.
Now, oil prices have spiked recently due to the conflict between Israel and Iran. We don't know how long these prices will be sustained, but we've just heard from our reporters as well from Brussels that the EU caps that they sought to make lower, they wanted to bring it from 60 down to 45, that for now that's out of the question. In the meantime, we have these sanctions that are on the table in the U.S. Senate with bipartisan support, Senators Blumenthal and Graham. Let's play a hypothetical if we could. If we could get those sanctions in place from the United States, these secondary sanctions which place 500% tariffs essentially on countries that trade energy with Russia, is this the stick that could break the camel's back?
It could, but it's so obvious that President Trump just loves Putin. So he's not going to allow the Republicans in Congress to push ahead with these sanctions. And Senator Lindsey Graham, who's the leading Republican pushing this passage, more or less said so yesterday. This will not go ahead. I think that it's more chance with the European Union. There it is primarily Hungary that is against these sanctions, and the majority of the EU members can do this through trade policy rather than through sanctions policy. Trade policy does not require unanimous vote, only a majority vote, while sanctions so far have required unanimous voting, and that's why Hungary has managed to block so many of the EU sanctions. So my biggest hope is with the EU rather than with the US, because here President Trump controls everything when it comes to the Republican vote in the Congress, and they will not overrule him.
Right, and he seems to be definitely the one that is holding that up right now at the moment. But looking inwards here at the European Union, I mean, we're not completely innocent either in the fact that Russia was exporting, supplying 45% of Europe's LNG and natural gas needs before the full-scale invasion in 2022. That number, after we're in the fourth year of the war and lots of discussions about heavy sanctions, 18 sanctions packages on Russia, and we still are importing 19%. If this dries up for Russia, this market, this European market, which is set to happen by 2027, 2028, what will that do for the economy of Russia? Will they be able to replace that supply with other markets?
No, because most of gas to Europe has gone through the pipelines. It used to be 40%. Of all gas coming to the European Union, and gas account normally for 14% of Russia's exports. Russia has developed some LNG, but still relatively limited. And if the EU now blocks LNG exports or imports of Russian LNG, then that will hit Russia quite hard. The Chinese are playing hardball with the Russians. So the gas that Russia sells to China is essentially without any profit for Gazprom. So Gazprom, which was the most valuable company in Russia and had the highest profit and the biggest taxpayer, is not likely to contribute much to the Russian federal budget for the foreseeable future.
So for this far into the war, what is your outlook? What should the Europeans do while the Americans continue to hold out for some kind of ceasefire or peace agreement and are actually out of the picture right now? What should be the current strategy that the Europeans should focus on? And what is the timeline for wearing down the Russian economy to the extent that it starts to fail to fight the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, there is no clear timeline. What we see now is that the war is likely to continue. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are very tired, but for the Ukrainians, it's an existential war. Ukraine spends half its GDP on the war, Russia only 8%. So it's a much less burden on Russia, but the Russians complain more about it because this is an unnecessary war for Russia. For Ukraine, it's an existential war. So the Ukrainians are holding out, but they are suffering quite badly. What Europe should do is everything for Ukraine now. As the Baltic states and Poland and the Nordic countries are doing, deliver all of the arms that are ready so that Ukraine can win. Ukraine is fighting for all of us in the West, and particularly in Europe, and most of all, seize the $200 billion of Russian central bank reserves that lie frozen in the Euroclear Bank in Belgium. There's no reason not to take this money, but Germany and France have so far been against it, while Poland has been consistently in favor of doing so, and that's the right step.
Okay, well, I hope we can keep the pressure on, and we'll be looking out for further signs of that Russian economy cracking. Anders Åslund, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And that concludes The Bottom Line for today. I was your host, Don Arlith. We're bringing you the best regional business Monday to Friday at 5 CET on TVP World. In the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and at tvpworld.com. For more news and analysis, stay right here on TVP World. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.